Sharon Kann is with us, the Abortion Rights and Reproductive Health Program Director at Media Matters, MediaMatters.org. Earlier in the program, I'd suggested that you check out the parallel, the twin kind of camera shots that they had of Trump and Hannity back and forth and back and forth. It's pretty breathtaking. Sharon, welcome to the program. Am I pronouncing your name right?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. So tell us your take on what Donald Trump said last. First of all, let's just recap what he said for people. I know many of our listeners just didn't bother watching or listening. But, you know, what he said and then why, you know, what your response is to that.
Yeah, so as sort of a quick recap, last night in the State of the Union, there had been reporting prior to the speech that he was going to center abortion-related issues because he thought it was something that would play well with his base. And in the speech, he did have a section about abortion, sort of. What he ended up saying was that he was going to make a push for legislation that would prevent what he called late-term abortions. He said that was in reaction to pieces of legislation that were moving in New York and Virginia, which he characterized as late-term abortion bills, but are actually about codifying state protections for abortion access. And he said that essentially he wanted a bill to make sure that that type of abortion was inaccessible, and encouraged Congress to vote on that. My take on that is that we were not surprised to see this show up in the State of the Union. Ever since New York and Virginia introduced these measures, we've been seeing right-wing media, and even, as you mentioned before, Sean Hannity, sort of having a very extreme and sensationalized reaction to these bills. And based on the amount of time that Fox News has spent covering it, the fact that Trump said it in the State of the Union was unsurprising given the feedback loop, especially given his penchant for anti-abortion misinformation that we know he gets from right-wing media.
Yeah, I think guns, gays, gods has been replaced with guns, abortion, and God. It's bizarre. So what are, you know, apparently Ralph Northam, the governor of Virginia, and I want to talk about that in a few minutes too, but apparently Governor Northam just kind of blew this question. Or maybe he gave a thoughtful doctor answer and Sean Hannity blew it all out of proportion. But, you know, what does the law say? What did the governor say that Trump went off on?
Yeah, so this, like you mentioned, it's been sort of conflated in several places along the way, which has made getting the accurate narrative kind of difficult for people, even who, you know, those who maybe don't have a strong opinion coming in. Originally what happened is that there was a bill proposed in Virginia that would remove some restrictions on later abortion care. Specifically, the measure in question was about they had a requirement or have a requirement in Virginia that in order to get a later abortion, you have to consult 3 individual doctors. And so part of the bill would have been to remove that requirement so that you didn't have to see 3 separate doctors for a procedure that you were consenting to and that a doctor approved of. There was a clip of this that went viral and that right-wing media took out of context and said meant that, you know, Democrats were supporting infanticide. This was complicated then when in an interview, Northam spoke to a different provision of the bill or spoke to a different aspect of medical care. He spoke to, it sounded like, what happens after a difficult pregnancy where there is a baby born that maybe needs medical care independent of anything to do with abortion, right. Which those are then taken out of context. Yeah, this is bizarre. So what specifically are these laws in Virginia and New York doing? You said that the three doctor provision. Was there anything else, or is it just that simple? So the laws. So the New York one is a law, and the Virginia measure was a bill that has since been tabled, I believe. The New York one is actually what kicked off right-wing media's interest in this whole narrative. The New York, there are several provisions of it, but I think the most important one is that if Roe v. Wade were to be overturned, there were provisions of New York state law in the criminal code that would allow for abortion to be punished under the criminal code, and that anyone who received or provided an abortion after 24 weeks could potentially face criminal liabilities or penalties. So what New York did was they removed this from the criminal code and codified protections that are already existing to ensure that if the Supreme Court, now with Brett Kavanaugh and Neil Gorsuch, were to overturn Roe, that people could still access abortion care in New York State.
Right, including later in the pregnancy if there's a crisis.
Yeah, if there's a risk to the health of the mother or the doctors determine that the pregnancy is not viable. Right,
remarkable stuff. So where is this going? We're talking with Sharon Kann of Media Matters. It seems like that was one big part of the speech that I heard no fact-checking on, no pushback on, really no response at all to in the media. And it was so inflammatory. It was so vivid. It was so violent, his imagery. is there any kind of nationwide pushback? Are we seeing change?
So I think there are sort of two important parts of what you just touched on. The first thing is that I think you're right that media, in particular media outside of sort of the right-wing echo chamber, do need to be vigilant about fact-checking these things. And I think something that would have helped a lot earlier on in the conversations about what's happening in New York and Virginia is if media that wasn't Fox News was having discussions about this that didn't just spread misinformation. So, for example, we watched Fox News talk about this for 2 weeks before there was any sort of coverage outside of that. The second thing that I think is important is that there are other states that are introducing measures that would similarly seek to protect abortion access. And I think given the response that right-wing media and anti-abortion groups have gotten from what's happening in New York and Virginia, they're going to try the same things. So media need to start fact-checking things like saying, hey, late-term abortion isn't a term. That's not a medical term and is not scientifically based, and we should stop using it in our reporting.
Right, yeah. Remarkable stuff. Sharon, keep up the great work. Please.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for being with us today. Sharon Kann, she's the Abortion Rights and Reproductive Health Program Director at Media Matters, MediaMatters.org. You can tweet her at Sharon, K-A-N-N. Do I have all that right, Sharon?
Yes, that's
great. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much.
Great talking with you. And I appreciate you dropping by.